This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
Hi, I'm Kevin Savitz, and this is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. Before we jump into the interview, I want to play you a piece of music. This is a piece of marketing promotional music intended to introduce the Jazz Scats and their three computer games, Coco-Notes, Movie Musical Madness, and Halftime Battlin Bands, which were released by CBS Software in 1984. CBS Software requested this song as an overview so they could promote the unique way that the instructions were being presented. The instructions were also all musical. They were record albums that came with the software. So as a way of introduction to you, I'm going to play for you this rare promotional song introducing the Jazz Scats.
I'm Mr. Chrome Tone, and I hang out with the Jazz Scats, who are bringing you a whole new world of computer games from CBS Software. Now, my Jazz Scat buddies are Swivel Hips, Wahoo, and Mr. Bassman, a distinguished and very talented entertainment trio, and music is our game. You're on, guys.
We'd like to introduce ourselves.
And we'd like to let you know
that we're the Jazz Scats. Check us out.
'Cause we've got things to show.
We like music.
And we like fun.
And we like to entertain.
That's right. And if you wonder where we do our thing, we do it on computer games.
Yeah, the Jazz Scats. We take our musical challenges all over the world to bring fun and excitement into your home. And by the way, Jazz Scat games are crammed with original music. You can play any of our games thousands of times without creating the same tune twice.
We wear dark shades.
And bebop hats.
And we're known by the name of the
Jazz Scats.
Yeah, we're the Jazz Scats. And here we are, fishing in the tropic sun.
We're on a coconut isle, and we're fishing for notes.
And it's fun for everyone.
Now, when I said those Jazz Scats travel, get a load of Coconut Isle, a colorful tropical fantasy land where you help those scats to create musical melodies. You fish for notes, create new melodies, or plug up the holes in a Jazz Scat tune. But watch out for the note-eating clam who tracks down your musical score cause he loves those Coco-Notes. Players are sure to grab onto this Coco-Note game hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, we're the Jazz Scats, and here we are in a different musical role.
Strike up the band, we're on a football field.
And it's time for the halftime show.
Yeah, it's halftime. The fans are cheering for entertainment, and the Jazz Scats are here to lead your very own marching band. Halftime Battlin Bands ushers in a brave new breed of electronic composer. And on top of that, you're the official choreographer of the Jazz Scat Marching Band.
Yeah, we're the Jazz Scats, and here's a musical game that's really fun to explore.
We're appearing in a movie on the video screen.
And you get to write the score.
Yeah, we're making movies, and you're the musical director. It's Movie Musical Madness starring the Jazz Scats. We've got 1,000 plots determined by the music you pick. See how creative thoughts are evoked in music. Movie Musical Madness. Light years ahead of anything on the silver screen. So there you have it from the Jazz Scats, Swivel Hips, Wahoo, and Mr. Bassman, coming your way from the Dovetail Group and CBS Software. 3 great characters, to say nothing of me, Mr. Chrome Tone, and 3 fantastic games in CBS Software's computer game lineup. Coco-Notes, Halftime Battlin Bands, Movie Musical Madness. Now don't you forget those scats.
We wear dark shades.
And bebop hats.
And we're known by the name of the
Jazz Scats. Yeah, we're the Jazz Scats. Remember that name?
You're gonna have fun with our musical game.
And we'd like you to know so you won't have to guess.
You'll find us all on CBS. Jazz Scats.
They made it doubly hard for us because they suddenly wanted us to not just create for the Atari platform, but to also create for the Commodore platform. So the work became double, and suddenly deadlines were not being met. Rich had to hold me back because my hands were going around the computer programmer's throat. I thought I would kill him. Where's the backup? He said, I was just getting ready to back it up. And I was like, you didn't back it up in stages? What, are you crazy?
Gerri Brioso is part of the Dovetail Group, a company that created 3 children's games for the Atari 400, 800, and Commodore 64 computers. All 3 games were released in '84. They were Halftime Battlin Bands, Coco-Notes, and Movie Musical Madness, all of which were released by CBS Software. Wikipedia says, quote, "These games are notable as they represent some of the earliest examples of the music management subgenre of music video games," unquote. The games were also notable because each of the games included a plastic record album playable on a phonograph, which served as the game's instruction manuals. The characters in the games and the records, Swivel Hips, Wahoo, and Mr. Bassman, made up a fictional band called the Jazz Scats. Check the show notes at AtariPodcast.com for a great picture of the Jazz Scats and the full audio from all 3 game records. In fact, there are now 2 versions of each record there, the versions that I digitized direct from the records and the versions that Gerri sent me from the master recordings. The lyrics on one of them are different between my version and hers. We can't quite figure out why. This interview occurred on July 30th and 31st, 2015.
It's kind of funny. Sometimes I interview people who started off making little Atari games and then went on to like do big stuff, and then we're only talking about the weird the weird computer game you made in the 80s or whatever. But I mean, you guys and your team are like serious musicians, and you've like got Emmy nominations and Grammy nominations and stuff. So can you kind of give me the 2-minute overview of what your group is and what it's done?
Well, let's see. We started off bringing 2 disciplines together. I was a graphic artist and animator who hooked up with Richard and Paul Freitas to, initially, I asked them to do music for animations that I was producing for Sesame Street. I was on staff there at the time, and we worked so well together that we started... we decided, well, this is kind of a service that we could provide to the television industry, creating music and graphics that kind of go together uncannily good because we work so well together. Usually a producer would have to look for animation and graphics and things like that and then look for the right music to fit it or find a composer that understood what was going on, or vice versa. They had music and they needed graphics to fill. So we started doing that. And we brought that same service via Sesame Street when we started doing the sound and graphics for all the games that were the original games created on the Apple II for Sesame Park. That when Sesame Place, when that opened way back in the early 80s, they were the first park to have what they called a computer center, which was all Apple IIs with games designed using the Sesame Street characters and the Sesame Street educational focus, basic learning for preschoolers, cognitive skills, basic skills, counting, colors, numbers, letters, that kind of thing. And so I did all the artwork, and Richard and Paul were providing the sound. So we were all tapping into a new field of production for media. This is when new media started, so I feel like such an ancient elephant by saying that. But it was great. Nobody knew what they were doing. We were just trying to do our best. That's when the pixel was the size of a brick. We found this new media that we could provide services to. And in doing so, I was always kind of the one coming up with wild and crazy ideas. And the next thing you know, we were providing the same service to Parker Brothers, Milton Bradley, and a few other companies who were just beginning to get into making games on the computer. And I think both Parker Brothers and Milton Bradley were using Atari as a platform.
Mm-hmm.
So in doing so, our work started getting a bit of a, more exposure. And I created 3 characters. We were, the 3 of us worked so well together, I decided to make us into characters, and we called ourselves the Jazz Scats because we were also producing music at the time for Sesame Animations using a jazz, let's say a basic scatting rhythm. And so we were calling ourselves the Jazz Scats, and I did this sketch of 3 characters that basically looked like us. And the next thing you know, CBS Software saw those characters because I think we were at some kind of conference. And they saw the sketch of the characters. Next thing you knew, we were in contract negotiations to produce a series of games that allowed kids to create animation and music on the Atari platform, because that's what we were doing for Milton Bradley and Parker Brothers at the time. And it kind of flew off from there. So we took a little bit of a break from television production to concentrate on this new media of computer games, which nobody knew what was going to happen, and it was just this giant explosion, and everybody was doing it. It was just suddenly this sea became filled with crazy creators, and it was like it was all thrown up in the air, and whatever landed and floated, that's what made it. It was the Wild West of computer games. It really was. Anybody with a crazy idea could get a contract, could get funding, and then it could either blow up or it could get out there and be fantastic. There were certain companies like Spinnaker, I remember, and, of course, those that were funded very well, the toy companies, that were coming out with stuff, and we were all kind of helping each other and yet competitors at the same time. It was wild, really wild.
So I know you for the 3 CBS games that we'll talk about in a minute, but it sounds like you did behind-the-scenes work for graphics and sound for many other games for Parker Brothers and things.
Yeah, we did. And if you're going to ask me what titles they were, I can't remember, to tell you the truth, because it was a service that we were providing, and maybe some of my graphics ended up in some of the games. Maybe I remember one was called Tudorville Trolley, and that was for Tudorville Trolley, which was a total music creation game, and that was amazing. We were doing that through a company in California. So you begin to get these tiers of development. You've got the main company, which was Milton Bradley, who subcontracted a software development company in California who subcontracted us. So it was all these tiers. The company in California was doing all the programming. And we were helping with the creation of the game, knowing that we were the key to the main elements, which was the on-screen graphic, and the core of the game, which was creating music by taking small fragments, maybe a measure at a time, 4 beats of music, and juxtaposing it in different ways to create a tune. It was the predecessor to actual MIDI creation, which anyone who wants to create music now plunks in a few things on a keyboard and then just moves it around and edits. So we were doing that. And the wild thing about that was we would do a lot of the work in our own studio in New York, fly to California once a month, get it implemented by the programmers out there. They would then send it over trunk lines to Massachusetts, where Milton Bradley was. We had to wait an hour and a half to hear what we had created, and then we'd have to create it. We'd have to fix it. Or I would look at the graphics and go, wait a minute, how'd that pixel get moved? It was archaic, absolutely archaic.
Wow. Was it was it a completely different challenge or a completely different set of problems from doing traditional animation, which you were already familiar with?
Oh, yeah, because you had to do it in such small sections because it took such great amount of memory and programming that you had to wait for everything to be implemented. You know, what I drew on my little pixel paper, because I did have pixel paper, and I would draw out my images, and I would draw out the next frame, and then I would draw out the next frame. There was no in-betweening at that time on the computer. I had to draw every frame. Then I would have to wait for that to be implemented. And at the same time, they were trying to develop drawing programs for me so I could implement and create on the screen myself. And then see it not quite in real time. Then I would hit a button, it would get shot over to Milton Bradley via these trunk lines, and then their programmers would make it work. It would come back to me. I would say, no, the second frame is wrong. I didn't do that. You messed that up. And then the same thing was true for the music. We would do maybe 4 bars of music. It would get sent over the trunk lines and then come back. So there was no real time, absolutely none whatsoever. And that remained true even when we started doing our Atari games. But what we did, as most companies did, we started creating our own implementation programs with a programming staff that we hired. It was wild because in normal production, there's a producer and a director, and then there's a lighting staff and a costuming staff and you know, a stage crew and everything. And that did prove, by using that model that we were so familiar with, we were able to create different staffs when we started creating the Atari games and treat it like a video production. And that kind of put us a little bit ahead of the others and made our programs look a little bit more like little productions as opposed to computer games, if that makes any sense.
Sure. So when CBS contracted you for the games, did they want 3 initially? Where did the ideas for what the games would be come from? Was it from your team or from CBS?
They did want 3 because it didn't pay for them to do 1. They needed to have a line of games. Rarely did any company contract a production or a creative team to do just 1, unless it was for an established character, meaning a Super Mario. Then maybe you could then you were just feeding that license or that brand. We were creating a whole new brand. And when you do that, you rarely do 1. You have to have at least 1 and 2 follow-ups. We did all 3 at the same time. They not only hired us to create these games, we were creating a new brand, which was the Jazz Scat brand, which was going to be known as the creative tool, or let's say the creative brand that allows kids to create graphics and music and create their own little movies. So what we were doing, it was mainly to let kids experiment with music. The music was the core of it because they were so impressed with the way that we had broken down and allowed kids through these Milton Bradley games especially, allowed kids to be creative while still playing a game. And having been, I had already done 14 years on Sesame Street, so, I was steeped in the educational entertainment learning model. And so I was able to kind of transfer that to the computer, which is what everybody was trying to do, because already as young as the computer game industry was, people were saying, well, wait a second, we just can't have kids hanging around and playing games. This is a way to teach them, the same way they said, television can go way beyond just viewing, it can be educational. Well, that was kind of the model or the mantra that Sesame had when it started. So we were kind of on the cutting edge of educational, entertaining software, but of course I had cut my teeth on that doing all of the Sesame Place games. And so ours were musical education, creatively, entertainingly there for kids to do what they wanted. So the three games, which were Movie Musical Madness, which had a little bit more of a bent towards actually creating the animation and the music, which is what we were all about. So that was really us. And then there was Coco-Notes, where you fished for notes, and all those notes would come together and create a melody for you, and you had an eye-hand coordination and that kind of thing to fish the notes out, and it was a fun little game. And then there was Battle of the Bands. What the hell is that one called?
Halftime Battlin Bands.
That's it, Halftime Battlin Bands, where you would pick up chunks of music and put that together. And yet it was a battle between two teams and things like that, from what I remember. And so they had three different approaches to making music, and also with the Halftime and Coco-Notes, the graphics were there to support the creation of music, and in Movie Musical Madness, you got to create both, which was kind of cool.
So how did they do? Was there a clear winner in that group, or a clear loser? Did they sell well?
Well,
CBS didn't make more, so you know.
Okay, this is as the Wild West progressed. And as I said, we hired a programming staff, mostly from Columbia University. They were brilliant students that came to us. We hired a person to head them up that was with Sesame at the time. I kind of stole him away, and he was creating software implementation to take all these things and make it easy to create, so that Richard and Paul and I could just plug it in. The programmers would put it all together, and out would shoot this wonderful thing. Well, we bit off a little bit more than we could chew. There wasn't anything out there. We had no choice. We had to figure out how to implement these things. Everyone who was creating, it was all proprietary. No one was sharing. And it was hard not to do that. At the same time, CBS made a deal with the Commodore 64, which had come out after the Atari had come out. And so they made it doubly hard for us, because they suddenly wanted us to not just create for the Atari platform, but to also create for the Commodore platform. So the work became double. The problems became double because the two platforms were not at all alike. And suddenly, deadlines were not being met, because they doubled our workload, but didn't spread out the deadline. First get the Atari games done, then get the Commodore. They insisted that we had to get them done in tandem at the same time for CES that was coming up in January. So everything, suddenly we had to increase the programming staff, and we had to double the output, and it got crazy. So the original deadline, when we got to CES, which was when, let's say it was about a year that we had for development, and of course, that, as I mentioned, the original year was supposed to be just for Atari, and then it became a double thing. So when we got to CES, they wanted both platforms to be shown. The games were not finished yet. They were supposed to be, but they weren't, for the reasons that I mentioned.
The games came out in 1984, so I'm assuming this is January 1984 we're talking about, just to kind of...
Yes, it was January of 84 CES. We were supposed to present both games. Now, you're saying the games came out in 84, right? So this was, CES used to happen twice a year. There was a spring and a winter and a spring. So what happened was we got the contract in 82, and by 83 spring CES, we were supposed to have everything done, but they doubled our workload because of the Commodore.
Mm-hmm.
So at that CES, we had prototypes going. The games were not finished, but it was enough to dazzle. And then they were supposed to be finished 5 months later, and they basically weren't. Wait a minute, I'm backing up even more. The timeline is getting a little fuzzy here. They did come out in 84, so this must have been a whole year before 83. That's when we presented in January of 83 at CES. They made a huge hit there, but they were not finished. These were prototypes that we concentrated on and made them work at CES. At the same time, we had also said, because this is a musical game, we want the instructions done musically. We don't want an instruction booklet. There was printed material, but it was very little because we wanted the kids to play, to hear the instructions musically. So we were also producing traditional type of media, in this case, one of those little vinyl records, because records were big then, believe it or not. Computers couldn't play music at that point, so they couldn't play audio. So we created records that were packaged, that were going to be packaged. And it was, the demand was, make sure the record is done for CES. So we're scrambling to do, first, it was supposed to be just the Atari platform. Then it got added to be the Commodore platform. Then we added in traditional production, and this was all supposed to be done in 12 months. Needless to say, it didn't happen. The record got done, and the record, the audio played at CES, and everybody thought this was fantastic because it was a cross-media type thing. It was the first time traditional media was brought in with the new media, so that made a big hit. But it was all smoke and mirrors because what we were showing was nowhere near completion, and it had to be completed. At first, they wanted it by September. It didn't happen. And then they wanted it had to be done by September for Christmas. Didn't happen. We just couldn't meet the workload. So what, in the meantime, the wave of computer games was beginning to crest. It did. We missed that crest. The games came out. They had mild success, but the wave had already crested, and the industry had moved on. Mm-hmm. And it was only, we found ourselves in the, let's say, in the bargain bin faster than we did on the shelves.
The record album thing was kind of brilliant, and they're still super fun, and it was kind of a unique, memorable thing that really made it stand out from a lot of the other games that came out.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you. I think the kids felt the same way because CBS had us testing them in schools. And what we would do is we would send the record first, and then we would send the game. So when we would enter schools, the kids were going crazy. They go, the Jazz Scats are here, the Jazz Scats are here. And the characters proved to be totally engaging and gripping. The kids loved it. So the characters were doing great, but the games were not, only because it was crested. I mean, the games they tested off the charts. Kids love them, absolutely love them. But it was just a little too late for any, let's say, big, huge financial success. Mm-hmm. They sold mildly, and I think it was basically, if you look at it, in retrospect, it was the first time. It was really the first multimedia production because we had traditional media, the records, we had the computer games, new media, and in this new media, you could be as creative as the records were. You could create Jazz Scat songs, and the characters were something that the kids wanted. CBS for a time was considering an animated series of the characters. But when the games did not sell the way they wanted to because, the reasons that I mentioned, first of all, we couldn't make the deadline because the demand they put on us was far greater than we had signed on for. And being young, dumb, and accepting a contract that was a little less than forgiving, it was basically they would change the contract, but we were too stupid to ask for more time, more money, and that. So, of course, the contractual money they gave us was all upfront money against future royalties, so there was no money to be made because we never made back the royalty amount that we were given up front. So personally, no money was made. CBS took a loss, as they did with a lot of software, and then CBS software was disbanded, basically. They were forward-thinking in the sense of, because they were a media company, they had seen the potential in mixing media. The other companies were strictly putting, like a company like Spinnaker, they were just a computer programming, game creating company with a bent towards education. And it was, so it would have been great if we had moved on with CBS, but they were banking on the Jazz Scats success based on the selling of these games, and the wave just crested for a bit sooner than they thought. When we got them out in a timely manner, but it was such a Wild West that it just crested sooner than anybody thought. And a lot of companies, including Parker Brothers in particular, found themselves on the back end of the crest and soon stopped doing computer games because of that. Their only big hit was Popeye, I think. The toy companies got out of computer software quickly because the wave crested too quickly for them, and they were not able to meet those deadlines either.
So I want to ask you about the characters, the Jazz Scat characters. What's with the names? Swivel Hips, Wahoo, and Mr. Bassman.
Well, that kind of goes into a couple of in-jokes. Richard Freitas was Swivel Hips because whenever he recorded, he just couldn't keep those hips still. It was very funny, and Paul and I used to laugh like if he was doing, then of course you did single track, multi-track recording, and so when Rich was doing his part and he was just standing there swiveling those hips, there was no other name for him. And Paul, who was always dropping his voice down, though he was not a bass, he would drop his voice down and go, "Well, Mr. Bassman says," and he would assume this character, so he was Mr. Bassman. And I was just the wild and crazy one in the group, always saying, "Oh yeah, we can do that." And and they would go, "Well, she says let's do it. Wahoo!" We would just go. So that's how the three names came about. Yeah, it was Swivel Hips, Bassman, and Wahoo.
Nice. And Richard died a few years ago, is that right?
Yes, he passed away just about 4 years ago, quite suddenly. Still, and Richard and I were married, and he after the computer games, we went on as a company, the Dovetail Group, which was Richard, Paul, and I, providing graphic and music services to the television industry, and then quickly started doing full production, mostly children's programming, along the lines of what Sesame did. We created many kid shows. We would also serve as a production company for various companies who wanted us. And when that grew to be just very tiresome, which went on for quite a long time, Rich and I, Paul had decided he wanted to go off and do something else, so he left the company around 1988, 89, something like that. And Rich and I were still doing production, and we continued on and did the best things that we've ever done up until about 2004. And then both he and I were tired of it, and we decided to go back to what we loved originally, which was music, and we went on to create a huge library of music that is still being used by the film and television industry. Richard was the master composer. I was more of the producer, yet I did collaborate, especially when we needed lyrics and things like that. Mm-hmm. And I would hum things, and he would turn them into wonderful songs. But he was the master composer. And quite suddenly, it was fast, quick, and out of the blue, and a total shock 4 years ago when he passed away. But he leaves a huge legacy of music that I am still in charge of licensing. We had a Super Bowl commercial last year. There was MasterCard commercials, recently HBO Girls. The next to the last episode of Mad Men featured a piece of music, and in fact that was Richard on piano. He was a phenomenal pianist, especially jazz, and a lot of his solo jazz piano music is heard all over the airwaves. Hardly a day goes by when I don't switch a channel and hear something, so it's kind of nice that that's still going on.
Yeah. So I was looking around the website, and there's some samples of the music. Are these like, we're getting away from Atari here, but it's interesting to me, so it counts. Are these like you compose these little pieces, and then they're just like kind of available in some sort of library for a producer to use, when you need a sound for the spy sneaking into the museum, and then you need something, you just like license this and drop it in. Is that kind of how this stuff is?
Yes. They're handled by what we call publishing agents. And I have a bunch of different agencies out there. I don't tend to put them on the open market, so to speak, because that is just flooded with a glut of stuff. And a lot of it not very good. So most of our music is handled exclusively by publishing agents out there, and that's how we tend to get the more network feature film placement, that kind of thing, as opposed to some of what has cropped up and become a huge industry, which is the royalty-free library music, that kind of thing. And we did start off with that because when we started focusing on the music library system, that was just beginning. That too, once again, I guess breaking new ground. Back in 2005, the library system was just beginning to grow. So some of our music is in some of the larger libraries that are out there that still basically cater to, clients who want to make sure the music is exclusive to them and that kind of thing. But quickly we began composing for exclusive libraries to handle the music, and they're more like agents, and that's the reason why the placements tend to be a little bit more on the higher end than just being used, because you can go to those libraries and license something for like $1 or $2 and use in your home video or your student project or something like that, and our music's not available there, and that's a conscious decision on my part.
Sure, that makes sense. I'm looking at the names of the things that you guys have done in like the copyright database, and some of the titles are hilarious out of context. Like "Buckled Up for Safety."
Well, in all of the years of doing educational programming for kids, you have sometimes you just put the name the title becomes the focus of the song, so to speak. And you just put it out there because it's easily recognized by ASCAP for royalties. Nobody else has that title, and who cares? It's never going to become a hit anyway.
Right. Okay, getting back to Atari. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, but then, like when you're creating music for publishing agents, you have to be a little bit more clever in your title, and you have to kind of convey what the music does, what it sounds like, where it can be used, all in the same title. It's got to be some kind of provocative thing to get noticed.
Sure, that makes sense. All right, so getting back to Atari stuff, what haven't I asked you about the software creation Atari Commodore days that I should have?
You didn't ask me how many nights we spent in the bar. You didn't. One thing that was crazy is we were living in a brownstone on the west side of Manhattan, and brownstone apartments are not large. I mean, many Manhattan apartments are not large. And so it was the apartment that Rich and I lived in. Paul lived in New Jersey at the time, so we weren't going to use that as headquarters. So in our small apartment, which was basically a kitchen, a bedroom with a loft, because the room was so small they had to raise the bed up in order to make the room seem like it was bigger. And so underneath the loft bed was the complete techno center. Banks of Ataris and Commodore 64s and monitors and music equipment. And this room, what couldn't have been more than, 6 by 10, okay? Really small. Then we had a living room that was a little bigger, but the place was filled with 3 programmers, a programming director, Richard, Paul, and myself, and our 4th partner, who was handling most of the Mr. Chrome Tone. He was the narrator on the records, and he was our 4th partner because his specialty was PR. So he was handling the PR, our PR interface with the PR departments of CBS. Mm-hmm. So we're all in this apartment. So for Rich and I to have any time by ourselves, we just headed over to our local bar, which was at that point was on 76th and Broadway, and it was called Shelter. Everybody knew us. It was like Cheers. We'd walk in and they'd go, Dovetail, and, and have the drinks ready on the bar. So the Atari years, and it was about 2.5 years being from, signing the contract, conceptualizing, getting the production ready, and doing it. Richard and I lived in that bar, basically. We worked in that bar because people were in our house all the time. That was it. So we might have liquidated a lot of that contract in that bar, so to speak. But it was definitely an experience, and one I wouldn't trade, except I had to stop drinking because, I don't think I would have lasted this long. It wasn't that bad. I make us sound like, fall down in the gutter drunks, but it wasn't. It was an escape. And because we were so comfortable there, we would actually bring our work and work there. Just believe it or not, that crowd did not seem as crowded as our own apartment because all these people scurrying about. And then, of course, there was the big faux pas before CES. All 3 games were ready to rock and roll. And one game, it just blew up. It blew up, literally the day before we were flying out to CES. The computer crashed. We couldn't get it back. And that one was Battling Bands, Halftime Battlin Bands. Totally crashed. And it could not be reconstructed. So we had to dive back into a previous version, which was not at all what we should have been showing, but that's actually what got shown at CES that year.
Huh. Did you manage to reconstruct the correct version before it shipped?
Oh, yeah, we did. But Rich had to hold me back because my hands were going around the computer programmer's throat. I thought I would kill him at that point. It was like, where's the backup? He said, I was just getting ready to back it up. And I was like, you didn't back it up in stages? What are you, crazy? Anyway, it was a scene at that point.
Imagine.
And actually, it was one of those things that he just kept working. We left, and things were FedEx to us, like discs that, it was kind of like, do not look behind the curtain. That's what we were doing at CES. Yeah.
All right. Well, tell me more stories. I think you have more stories.
Well, this is something I hadn't thought about in years, and it begins to come back to me, and it kind of makes me want to go back to the bar. To tell you the truth, it was, the thing that was so foreign to us, because we were production people. It was tangible. You hired musicians to play things. They came in prepared. They played their part. Here we were hiring programmers to create out from the air, just keep creating, doing things that people had never done before, whereas a musician had been playing their instrument for years. So because of those intangibles, you never knew if it was going to work. You had these ideas, and in theory, it would work. No one had ever tried to do animation before we did, to allow kids to be in charge of animating, creating scenes, picking out hair for the character, picking out a background, picking out a theme, picking out music, picking out action. No one had ever done that before. Sounded like a great idea, but here we were creating from scratch. Yes, you do create from scratch with a production, but it's with a whole bunch of tried and true, tangible, real people things. There were no real people here. We were creating the people. So you never knew if it was really going to work. Yet you had convinced all the executives at CBS that it was going to work. Okay. Well, that was, as I said, that was the Wild West. It was.
Wow.
So anyway, that's what was very strange about it. And you, as the head of this, whoever was kind of like the overall producer, which was more or less what I assumed on top of doing all the graphics and everything, that doubt was looming constantly. Will it work? Will it work? And deadlines were very, very difficult because every time you took a step forward, 10 would be taken backwards. And that was kind of hard to accept. If you're on set and an actor forgets his lines, you quickly make up a cue card to help him. Here, if a character forgot to move, it's because there were 2 days of programming that went into it and something is missing. There were days when the music implementation program was not working and we were literally reading. I was reading from a piece of paper, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, to implement each one of those sounds. And each sound was a whole row of binary numbers. We're talking about ancient here,
Yeah.
It wasn't easy. It really wasn't easy. And it didn't deter us because we did love the new technology. In fact, I was one of the first people in New York to have my very own computer animation system. I was the first one to do computer animations for Sesame Street. And our audio studio was one of the only digital audio studios to exist for a long time. So we did, it was fabulous, it was frustrating, it was fabulous, but it kind of, the new media and the new mode of creating just kind of hooked us. and kept us going and kept us kind of a step ahead of everybody else in a sense, which was kind of cool. As far as going back to doing the games, the most frustrating thing I ever experienced in my life, because you couldn't make it happen. You were at the mercy of computer programmers who were doing all new things. And the platforms kept changing faster than the speed of light. And nobody talked to each other. Atari talked to Commodore? Hell no, you know?
Right. Yeah. Do you have anything from back in the day? Do you have any of the programming notes or sheet music or anything from those projects?
You know, I think I have some of the music. I've thrown out most of the graphic sketches and things like that. I may have the music because actually, well, the records I know were copyrighted, and the music that we wrote was definitely, I have that someplace, you know, the written out scores and things like that. And I actually have a lot of the music notes that Rich made and that I made doing this. So there's someplace around. Here to come to the storage unit.
When you find it, please let me know. I'd love to, you know, we could scan it and show it to the Atari people.
Okay. Well, awesome. the next time I head down to storage where all the music files and things are, I will take a look, because now you've kind of perked my curiosity too. It's not something I thought about or cared to remember, the nightmare. I think, you know, if we had met our deadline, I'd have a different view. I don't have a bad view. I had some of the best time. We all did. We had some. It was so wild and crazy, and it was all so new. You couldn't really blame anybody because these kinds of, you know, faux pas were going to happen. It would just be like the beautiful way the fishing line moves in Coco-Notes was a mistake, and yet it had that beautiful torque of a fishing line in water. It would meet. It
was really cool. Yeah, I was almost mentioned it earlier. That's like so beautiful the way it the line kind of sways as it goes down.
And believe it or not, I do remember the names of our programmers, and that was a young Korean. His name was Woon, and he was fascinated by the animations that he had seen that I had done. And he took it upon himself to do what I think was the first flowing animation in all of computer games, because he wanted to have something that really, really looked beautiful. And when he came in with that, he just knocked us out. He was about 19 years old and a genius. And I was just like, it was fantastic. But for months, that was all we had, was this line moving across the screen. Then, you know, having to get it connected to the notes that were in the water and being able to pluck them out, having that be remembered as the first note. Then, of course, there was the clam that came through and ate the notes, so you had, you know, you were fighting that to try and grab as many notes before the clam did. So that's my favorite game, I have to admit to you. It really is. My least favorite was Movie Musical Madness, because in my mind that never worked the way I wanted it to. I did like Halftime Battlin Bands, but I wasn't as fond of the graphics in that one. Coco-Notes was definitely hands down the favorite. It was the one that at CES we could present in its entirety, because Woon was he was dedicated, he was wonderful, he was methodical, and I'm sure he's being brilliant out there someplace else. And that game might be my favorite because it did come to fruition. It did get done on time on both platforms because he was brilliant. And sometimes I think one thing we found in those days, and I don't know if it's still true because it's changed, so the programmers were always trying to reinvent the mousetrap. They'd come up with something that worked. We'd say, great, let's move on. They'd want to reinvent it and make it better and not move on. And that was the biggest problem in creating. And I don't know, which game, you've seen them all, which game did you like?
Yeah, I own them all. I like Coco-Notes a lot. That's fun, and you get to hear you pick up all the coconuts, and then you get to hear your little song at the end. I really like the animation on Movie Musical Madness. Like the guys walking around, and you can walk towards you and away from you, and left and right, and in front of things. And the animation on that one is pretty impressive, I think.
Thank you. I'm glad you like it. It's so funny because that was the hardest one, and I guess I've blocked out the results because the work leading up to it was oh my God, it was so hard. It was so hard just to do those little things. And I guess I pushed a little. Being an animator, I really, really pushed those guys hard because I wanted it to do something, and because it came out a little too late. And you know, at CES, you walk around, you get further ideas, and everybody was stealing from everybody. And, you know, you saw your ideas, somebody else doing it and doing it better because they could take it a step further because everything was evolving so quickly. And so I thought other people do it better than we did, so it bothered me, you know, I guess. And I love simplicity, and I felt Coco-Notes, the simplicity there that was just beautiful. I didn't feel, maybe because of what it went through, Halftime Battlin Bands I felt was not very good. I was never happy with that, though it's one of my favorite records. So there you go.
Why do you like that record better than the others? Because as far as I could tell, the background track was always the same, and it was just you guys changed the lyrics.
Yeah, it was. I don't know. There was something about that track. Maybe, I don't know. I thought because the problem with that game, it was too complex. And it was too complex because too many people had something to say about that one. And maybe they did because it was the weakest, I thought. But I thought that the record showed what it could have been, but the game itself got too, I don't know, did you feel it was too complex? It had too many variables? Or did you not feel that way?
Like you say, it's not my favorite of the three, for sure.
Right.
Yeah. I like the idea that you're kind of working with musical phrases, but then they're kind of canned phrases, and I don't know, it didn't work for me.
Yeah, I didn't like that one either. It just didn't make it, and that was the one with the most problems, and that's the one that blew up before CES. And Coco-Notes was finished and was beautiful. Halftime Battlin Bands had blown up and was just smoke and mirrors at CES. And Movie Madness was not complete, so I felt we weren't showing off the best parts of it at CES. When it did become complete, I was happy with it. But I guess the beauty of the simplicity and the ease that it came together keeps Coco-Notes kind of like the one that I still love the most.
Yeah.
But the records were certainly the big hit. They really were. And that kind of proved to us, go back to what we do best. And that's why we got out of the game business.
Okay, I think this will be my last question. So there were kids back in the day playing your games, and now they are adults. Some of them listen to our podcast. And if you could send them a message, which you can right now, what would you tell them?
Wow. What would I tell them? I would tell them to just, whether they feel they're creative or not, just go for it. Just do anything. Anything you do is a creation of whatever you do. Just throw caution to the wind and go for it. You never know what will happen. You could get a contract with CBS. There you go. I guess, I am very big, and big on creativity, imagination, and having no boundaries. That's what I specialize in at Lincoln Center in what I do with kids there now. And basically, I hope that those games kind of gave everybody a little inkling that they do each have a spark of creativity in them. And nurture it. Don't ignore it, because creativity doesn't have to result in a hit song. It might show itself in some way that you never even thought of.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have what I need, and that was great. Thank you for your time.
I appreciate you you digging us up after all these years. And so you do have a working Atari?
Yeah, there's 2 on my desk right now.
Oh my gosh. I have the games, and of course I don't have an Atari unit any longer. I always loved the artwork done by Jerry Zimmerman for those covers, because I felt he captured it beautifully, based on the sketches that I had of the characters. And but I haven't seen them work I didn't even think there was any consoles working. Do you also have the Commodore versions or not?
No, I'm an Atari guy, so I don't have the Commodore version. If you want to see it, if you want to just like walk down memory lane, go to YouTube and Google the names of the programs, and people have made videos of almost every Atari game, including those. So you can. Oh my
God, I can't believe it. Oh, I am very anxious to do that. That is a riot. I can't believe it. You can find anything on YouTube. It's amazing.
That's true.
It really is. There's some things, people have gotten in touch with us because they go, I just found this, and and the stuff they find is unbelievable. I mean, dating way back, really far back. And it's because Richard and Paul have been in the music business ever since they were kids, because their father was a composer, and they had been in recording studios since they were kindergarten. So they had records out there that, believe it or not, people are hoarding and finding. And every so often I'll get an email addressed to Rich, of course, saying, are you still, and where can I find? And I'm just shocked. I really am. But it's kind of nice, too, on the same side. So I'm definitely going to go to YouTube as soon as we finish, because I am curious. That is. Were you the one who put those up, or did somebody else do it?
No, I didn't put them up. I did find the records, and I digitized those, and I put those up at archive.org. Sorry to, I'm ignoring your copyright, but I figured. But no, I didn't make the videos, so someone else did that.
Oh, okay. Well, that's wild. I'm glad I asked, because I'm very curious, because I can't visualize. I can visualize Coco-Notes. I can't visualize Halftime, I guess, because I've blocked that one. It was such a pain in the neck. And I don't remember movie as well. So I'm curious. I'm going to go there. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for your time today.
You're so welcome, and thank you for the opportunity. And it's good to know that these things just continue to find a life of their own. It's really incredible, but that's kind of cool. It really is. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it, Kevin.
Thank you, Gerri.
I was totally knocked out when I went and looked at the games again. And one of the things that struck me right away was Halftime Battlin Bands really was the piece of crap that I thought it was. True, absolutely true. And remember when I told you it blew up? It should have stayed blown up, because it was pretty bad. When I remembered in looking at it, I guess I suppressed a lot, because it was our most troublesome game, and there were so many cooks from CBS chiming in because Coco-Notes and Movie Musical Madness in their purest form were exactly what we wanted them to be, which were games, not games, which were activities where kids could be creative. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to do the same thing in Halftime Battlin Bands, but they were insisting on a real game, a real something, something hitting something and something shooting something and all of that, because the other ones really didn't have that. Movie Musical Madness didn't have it at all. Coco-Notes, once you got into Beat the Clam, which I loved, you did gain a score because you were trying to outwit the clam, and they were very happy with that. But Halftime Battlin Bands always was supposed to be some kind of musical shoot-'em-up game. And boy, was it bad. It really was. I mean, the whole thing with, throwing the football to hit the notes and slipping on a banana peel and blowing a whistle, it was just so convoluted. And that's a perfect example of too many cooks diving into the pot.
Okay.
And as I had mentioned to you, games were, we were evolving from Pong and competition and dexterity, eye-hand coordination in order to compete and get a good score was really the norm, and they felt they could only suck in kids if they included that. That kids demanded that. And when we tested the games, kids ignored Halftime. They loved Coco-Notes, and they really loved Movie Musical Madness. And the powers that be were finding it very hard that kids wanted to create stuff, not just shoot stuff. And that was, I guess, it was one of the first breakthroughs that computer games could go far beyond what they thought would be of interest to kids. Mm-hmm. So that was one thing that hit me because I just didn't remember. I did remember Coco-Notes. I forgot about Beat the Clam. And he was, it was such an in-joke for us because, when you play a wrong note and you're a musician, it's referred to as a clam. So that's why the clam was there. And there were a lot of in-jokes that I forgot. The fact that Swivel Hips was sleeping, Rich was Swivel Hips, and he could fall asleep at the drop of a hat. And we were just constantly teasing him about that.
Oh, you mean in Coco-Notes, he's sleeping, he's leaning against the tree asleep.
Yeah, he's sleeping. Yeah. And then when you're playing the Beat the Clam challenge, the Z's go up in the tree and they hit the notes out. Mm-hmm. And, so there was that little in-joke. And then there was, I'm trying to think what else there was. Well, we did have, in the end animation, Mr. Bassman is playing the trumpet, and that is Paul's instrument. And let's see, in Halftime Battlin Bands, and I'm playing the flute at the end, and that is my instrument. So there were all these little nuances, and that kind of comes out of my training at Sesame Street because in the days when I worked on the show was not just designed for kids. There were a lot of way over the head of kid-type jokes to keep the adults interested so that they would sit there and listen and watch the show with their kids because every so often the puppets would throw out a little zinger and there would be all these little in-jokes that only the adults would get. And that's what made a unifying factor in terms of families watching together, or in the case of Sesame, mostly whatever parent was at home, mother or father. And I guess we kept throwing in those little in-jokes in this, and some of it was even found, I wish I could play Movie Musical Madness because if I saw all the different things that I designed for it, I'm sure there are stories behind that too, which is very funny. So it's kind of like our lives revealed and nobody knew it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I remember the tussles, the memory tussle, meaning we had a certain amount of memory to work with. And because we wanted the music and the creation of that music to be so good, a lot of the memory was allocated to that because generating sound took an awful lot of memory way back when. So I remember that's why the games only have 2 colors, because the more colors you would add, the more memory you would use. So I was limited to certain colors with the exception of a payoff maybe at the end. But during game time, so there were so many restrictions. And the one thing I do remember is the screen for Coco-Notes, that palm tree in the middle, and then that had to be inputted all with zeros and ones. It was
a beautiful
crazy.
Screen.
Well, I drew it out on pixel paper, and then I transferred the areas that I wanted in a certain color into the binary numbers that were necessary, and we sat there reading row by row and inputting it. As I mentioned to you, I remembered inputting binary numbers, but then it came flooding back when I saw the tree again. I went, oh my God, that entire screen, as well as each one of those characters and their various positions were all put in binary code. Wow. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And that's why I nearly killed the programmer when halftime blew up, because all I could think of was, I'm not doing this again.
So seeing the games for the first time in many years, I'm wondering if the graphics and sound are better or worse than in your memory.
The graphics, I loved the graphics only because I marveled at what I could do with a brick. a pixel right. Bigger than, a brick. And I don't mean to say that to pat myself on the back, but I remember at that time I was getting an awful lot of work, not only for our games or Sesame. I was being called on at that time to do a lot of graphic work for a lot of companies because I had a way with those bricks. Let's put it to you that way. And I liked seeing the graphics. It didn't make me cringe. What it did remind me is how carefully we crafted the music, because in Coco-Notes we had to create rhythm tracks over which any note could be played, whether it was in the chord or not. So in order to make sure there wasn't a lot of dissonance, the track had stop time. You'd hear boop, beep, boop, beep, and then a note would fit in. And then you'd hear beep, bop, boop, boop, and then another note would fit in. So what Rich did was quite ingenious, because whatever note was picked, it would work in those tracks. Now that I've seen them, I really do have to look for that music, because I don't remember how many different background rhythm tracks we did, but there were quite a few, because most of the memory was allocated to that. And that's what was so wonderful. And then all of those dots on the bottom of the screen in Movie Musical Madness, each one of those, from what I remember, and only you can tell me, because I only saw the video of that game, that one round that the player played, but I seem to remember that all those dots below the screen was a different, let's say, genre of music to evoke emotion, because one of the things was trying to see how coherent or how long it would take a kid to begin to populate the screen and then add to sound that enhanced it, as opposed to just throwing things on the screen. And I do remember when we were testing these things in schools, and we did a lot of it, and the kids came up with incredible things, and they would save them, like they would build them, and then they wouldn't turn the computer off until we saw them. It was incredible. There was some unbelievable things. There was really careful thought. They kept track of what piece of scenery they used and which piece of music they used, and they were working together to build these little plays or movies. And it really was an incredible creation tool. And thank goodness they didn't make us start shooting at people in that one, too. And I think that one got some of the best reviews because it really was the very first create your own movie type thing. Very quickly that was copied and, of course, enhanced and done better as the technology got better. I think it was a little better on the Commodore 64, but
you can't say that on this podcast. I'm sorry. We're done here.
Oh, sorry. We just had a little bit more memory to deal with. I might have been able to put in another color or two, though it didn't need it. It's pure and clean and wonderful on the Atari. And, the Atari was a machine that was easy to deal with from what I remember. We had, you'll love this, we had more problems with the Commodore. It was very straightforward, and its restrictions were very clear. There weren't any fuzzy edges, so we didn't get in trouble that much. Mm-hmm. And Movie Musical Madness and Coco-Notes went along very well, but there was just too much convoluted junk in Halftime that kept it from being easily realized, and then, of course, it blew up, so there you go. And it's annoying too. It really is annoying. I just, the only thing good about that game is the record that goes along with it and the cover art for the box.
Well, tell us how you really feel about it, Gerri.
I won't hold back the next time we talk, okay?
All right.
But I really did enjoy Coco-Notes a lot. I really did. And watching that line move again, we spoke about it. It was really a beautiful thing. And of course, I have to admit, I did not remember Movie Musical Madness as much, so I was very happy to see it. And then I remembered how much I liked it. And I think I didn't remember it because it was the one that posed the least problems to us. It just flowed. It was quite incredible. So, and it gave the kids the most control, and I think I got the biggest kick out of watching the kids use that one.
I'm surprised that gave you the least trouble because it looks like from a technical perspective it's the most complicated. There's all these background graphics, different graphic shapes that you can place arbitrarily around the screen, and Coco-Notes is basically you've got a blank, a static screen with small dots that move. But Musical Madness, there's all these huge graphics you can choose from to move around. So it seems like a more complicated, technically, game.
It was, and I seem to remember our head programmer, who was someone I worked with at Sesame, and stole him from the Sesame computer division at that time. He wrote proprietary software to do these things, and it made it easy to implement because we built kind of, if you're thinking of it in today's terms, we built little apps to do things within the program. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, the mechanics of the Atari loaned itself to that, which was very nice. And that one did not pose as many problems. It really didn't. And it was just so much fun to work with because there were all these wacky pieces of scenery. And the fact that I think we defined planes in a sense, so the character could move all around, and it was quite incredible. I do remember when we started out each game, we always did a flow chart, the what if and if then, that kind of thing. And it was essential to programming back in those days. And sometimes these flow charts were a whole wall with sticky notes all over it. It was incredible. And that one planned out easily. And I think it was Drew, our head programmer. He was the one who built all these little pieces that came together to make that work. So it was, many little programs within a program, and it really did work well. And we were able to have a good time creating all of that music, those little melodic gems that reside in all those lower lights, and that was fun too. It really was what we do well, which was putting on a show, because that's what we were. We were a production company. Whereas Coco-Notes was a little bit more of a challenge musically because tracks had to be created that would work with no matter what notes were chosen. And then Halftime Battlin Bands, we did come up with good chunks of music, but it was just obliterated with all the messiness that was unnecessary in that game. That could have been much purer. And I think it was initially, but they were afraid that it wasn't different enough from Coco-Notes. And Coco-Notes was really single note melody, so you could begin to discern, maybe begin to hear the difference between a low note and a high note, and how it sounds above a track, and then you had the game aspect. But Halftime Battlin Bands, they weren't satisfied with being able to create a march. And I think we had, there was going to be marching formations on the field, something like that. I don't remember, but it just, I'd rather not remember that one. It was a dark day in computer land.
Well, thank you so much, Gerri.
You're so welcome, Kevin. I hope that helps a little bit more in the interview. And thank you so much for, I listened to the recording, and, your effort in getting them online is admirable. I do have the original recordings if you ever want those.
Oh, absolutely, because the ones I have are, those records sound like a scratchy mess.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I promise you, if I find some supporting material along with, I do know where those tracks are. I can find those. I'll pass it on to you if you'd like. I don't mind.
I would love that.
Okay, I will do so. And I'm glad, I really appreciate you letting me know that they do exist. And I can't wait to show them to Paul. We'll have a good laugh over this.
Good. All right.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm glad we were able to talk again. Have a good evening.
Beat the Clam is game number 4. You gotta fill in notes that weren't there before.
And just when you pop them in the coconut trees, the scat can snore them down with Z.
And the clam thinks bonus notes taste just fine, but you gotta watch out he doesn't eat your line.
Well, the Jazz Scats didn't have time to finish their award-winning tune for this game, and they're calling on you to help them out. Here in the Beat the Clam game, old Swivel Hips is at it again. In fact, he's snoring louder than ever, so keep watching out for those Z's. And remember that clam, he's hungrier than ever. Come on, grab your fishing pole and help those scats plug up the holes in their Coco-Note tune. Got anything more to say, guys?
We wear dark shades.
And bebop hats.
And we're known by the name of the
Jazz Scats.
Yeah, we're the Jazz Scats. Remember that name?
We hope you have fun with our Coco-Note game.
And we'd like you to know there's more to come.
So look for our games, cause they're all fun. Jazz Scats.